Over and Back Classic NBA Podcast. I am Jason, and with me as usual is Rich. Hello, Rich.
What's going on, Jason?
Oh, just enjoying some actual basketball being played, which is a kind of nice thing to watch in these trying days.
Absolutely, yeah. It's been great, and I don't know if it's just that we've been in a desert and there's a pond, and I'm like, whatever, I'll drink this wine. But I've liked the basketball that's being played. I don't really mind the lack of fans as much as I thought I would. I guess I've kind of gotten used to it a little bit with empty arena wrestling, has I guess helped me ease into it, not having any human beings at sporting events. But I don't mind it too much, and I think the NBA has been doing a really, really good job. I think the bubble obviously is inspiring, on maybe a global level of hey, this is probably how you try to actually handle a pandemic as opposed to, how baseball's doing, which is a much different strategy and style. But yeah, overall, I've really enjoyed the basketball so far. And I think, it's weird. It's a little weird. Obviously, we're going to talk about it this year. But all in all, I've had a lot of fun watching it.
Yeah, it's been nice. Hopefully things continue to be safe and enjoyable for everyone. Of course, safe being the most important thing. But yeah, you would have to say that 2020 will end up, certainly probably being the weirdest season ever, in the NBA. And,
for sure.
Obviously there's 140.
I hope. Hopefully.
Yeah, right. Oh yeah.
Let's fingers crossed.
Yeah, that's true.
And we always look back and go, wow, that 1 year, that was weird. Yeah, but thank God everything's not as weird as 2020 was. Man, that was a weird year.
Yeah. Who knows what's coming, of course. But yes. But yeah, there were. Obviously the biggest thing that people are going to remember forever is the pandemic. 141 days between regular season games, which is literally the same amount of days between the beginning of the 2020 season, October 22nd, 2019, and the last games before the season was suspended, which is I was trying to calculate that, and I was very surprised to see it was exactly the same number of days.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. It's the exact same. I don't think they stumbled upon that number, the way they did, but it is pretty interesting. And yeah, it just makes you realize how long we didn't have it and how weird that this season is. That I was doing, some writing for fansided.com earlier today, and I'm looking at these dates and I'm like, yeah, actually, February 2020 is the same season. It's, or November 2019 is the same season. It's hard to believe and it's hard to rationalize because you're like, wait, what? It's just been so weird and yeah, it's been such a long season and it just is, it feels very weird to be in the midst of summer and there's basketball on. I don't hate it. I kind of like it. It's fine. But given the circumstances, obviously it is. Yeah, no, undoubtedly, hopefully, fingers crossed, the weirdest season ever. And you add in that stuff happened earlier in the season that you completely forget was this season as well. There's probably the most famous one is the death of Kobe Bryant. That was this year, NBA season. And it feels literally like it happened 2 decades ago.
Right. And that certainly has to be the most disruptive death, of a former player during a season. Obviously, only 4 years removed from his career, still a major figure in the NBA. There's really not been a comparable situation with a NBA star dying so young and dying during a time. And obviously, there were games postponed and millions of tributes, and the whole league was affected majorly. And Davis Stern obviously being a significant death as well. But the impact that Kobe had, it feels odd. The pandemic almost gave us a little bit of distance between Kobe's death. I feel like there would still be more tributes, and there probably will be, in the playoffs and in the finals, especially if the Lakers end up making it. There'll be discussions of Kobe again, but I feel like that was kind of almost, halted prematurely because of what happened with the pandemic, and it has kind of faded a little bit into the background. Obviously, still important and emotional, but just kind of a different tenor after the whole pandemic. But yeah, just those two things entirely, would make that this the strongest candidate for weirdest season ever. But there's some other ones that are worth discussing, and we're gonna dive into that here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting ones. We asked some listeners as well to chime in and give us some thoughts on weird ones. We heard a lot of the ones you're going to hear throughout the course of this episode are going to be pretty famous ones and ones that were pretty obvious. But there was a few ones too that were just like, hey, here's this weird year, look into it. And I'm like, yeah, that year's pretty damn weird. So I'm glad someone said it. But yeah, some of the ones you could probably think off the top of your head, but I think we have some fun ones for you too among the list.
Yeah, no, it definitely. Yeah, some that I think are less conventional unless you really dig into it and find out. So, and obviously, if you feel like there was a weird season that we missed, you let us know. We're on Twitter at Over and Back NBA, Facebook, however you want to get hold of us, and let us know if there's other seasons that are worth consideration. But these were the strongest ones in our mind. The first one was the 1993-94 season. The real major events, of course, are the retirement of Michael Jordan, and to a lesser degree, but pretty significant in the long run, is the change of the newer shortened 3-point line. And you'll have some more stats on to kind of the effect of that during the 3 seasons in which it was implemented. But obviously, Jordan's retirement, leaves a huge void in the league. The three-peat Bulls no longer the favorites to win the championship. It puts the whole title scene, especially in the Eastern Conference, wide open. Before that, one of the strangest things to happen was the Orlando Magic, who drafted Shaquille O'Neal the previous season, became the first team in the lottery to get back-to-back number 1 picks. They end up drafting Chris Webber, then immediately trade him to Golden State for Penny Hardaway and 3 first-round picks, thus, setting the course for what, looked like a potential dynasty over the next few years. And that also led, of course, to the NBA making changes to its rules in the lotteries to make it more difficult for for teams that finished with a better record to get a first round pick, although those rules have since been changed again to make it more like
back and forth. Yeah, the how do we fix the lottery thing has been going on. Yeah, if people think that's a new thing, oh no. From the moment the lottery existed, there's been we need to find ways to incentivize winning. Well, no, not that much winning. There's always this in between. Well, not that team. No, we can't have that team get the first overall pick. So yeah, it always ebbs and flows and whatnot. But yeah, no, and I think that, notwithstanding the weirdness of getting the back-to-back first-round picks, getting to, generationally, great players potentially, and they really did. I mean, in terms of Shaq and Chris Webber, both fantastic picks. But then, trading Chris Webber immediately to Golden State for Penny Hardaway, which, elicits, it's pretty famous in the Magic moment, ESPN 30 for 30, where the fans are just like, what? Penny Hardaway? Anthony Hardaway from Memphis State? What are you doing? This is unbelievable. And obviously turned out to probably be the better overall pick for the Magic. And yeah, notwithstanding some issues that happen down the line, Penny and Shaq obviously create a very dynamic and duo and make Orlando one of the top teams in the league for a little bit of a run. And I don't know how it would have worked with Chris Webber or whatnot, and Chris Webber and Shaq. It seemed kind of weird at the time, but yeah, it began the weirdness of this year that just continued to be weird almost the entire year.
Yeah, and the other major event, really the key event, Michael Jordan shocking the sports and entertainment world, retiring from the league just before the beginning of the regular season after his father had been murdered that summer. We, of course, talked about this in our discussion of the Jordan Rules documentary. But one thing to note, that this is the 3rd straight season where major NBA retirement occurred. 1991, right before the beginning of the 92 season, Magic Johnson announces his HIV diagnosis. He's HIV positive right before the beginning of the season. Obviously, that was a huge, national, global story. A major situation, even bigger than I think the Jordan retirement in some respects, just because of there was a huge impact beyond.
Cultural significance of oh my God, Magic Johnson has HIV, and a fight that had been going on for years and years and years is that, hey, look, people that can get this thing, and well, I guess weirdly maybe related to 2020 in some way, but it's not just this certain sect of people, it's not this certain type of people, even people that you wouldn't think are would get it, can get it, and it's just the HIV, if you weren't alive at the time or haven't studied that time period, Magic Johnson announcing that he's HIV positive, I mean the cultural ramifications well beyond sport, from one of the most famous athletes coming and coming out and saying that he had this was huge. It was gigantic.
Right. And then 1992, Larry Bird retiring right after the Dream Team Olympics in August. And then Magic Johnson actually announced a comeback in September. And then based on the feedback from that, decided to retire again in November, feeling like, there was negative feelings from the players about him coming back and some concerns about about how he would fare. So he decided to retire again. Another big game. But so, 3 straight years of basically the 3 biggest stars in NBA history up until that time, retiring three consecutive years. I mean, that's pretty amazing streak for the NBA to go on.
Yeah, and unfortunately, and you're talking about, not just like 3, good players, but Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, the guys that kind of quote unquote bring the NBA back from the doldrums, and then Michael Jordan, the guy that kind of sets them, into the next stratosphere in terms of sports leagues. Yeah, all 3 of those guys leaving in a short amount of time, huge ramifications for the NBA. And the next kind of one that we want to bring up here, the deaths of Reggie Lewis and Drozen Petrovic, also during the summer of 1993. Petrovic was, during the 93 finals, so I guess it's a little bit more connected to the prior season, but it still, I think, had ramifications and it had, kind of ripple effects on what would become this season. And then, of course, the death of Reggie Lewis, which is an episode that we recently released as a we're doing Over and Back Classic episodes, going into our archives and posting old ones. And that's one that I wanted to get up right away. It was right on the anniversary of his death. And I think one of our really good early episodes, we had Seth Partnow on there, just talking about how big of a deal it was that Reggie Lewis died. This is, you mentioned there, the prior year, Larry Bird retires, but it's like, it's cool. The Boston Celtics have Reggie Lewis. Like, we're good. We have our next guy here. And then he, of course, tragically passes away. And now, the Celtics, not only just, the huge news of what a presumed very healthy NBA player dying, just from, the heart conditions and stuff, but also the Boston Celtics of, now what do we do? And what they did was, basically be bad for, a decade after this, because they had their plan in place. Reggie Lewis was going to be their next star, and then poof, he's just gone. So 2 huge tragedies, and not to discount Drozen either, because it was the trajectory that Drozen was on was pretty incredible as well. And unfortunately, both of them pass away.
Right, and 2 young stars, who not replace Jordan by any stretch of the imagination, but could fill in a bit, and rising stars, and both rising exciting teams, particularly the Nets, that the NBA lost during that time as well. So certainly, a lot of rough things happening during this time. One of the more infamous trades in NBA history occurs during the trade deadline in '94. The Hawks trade their most famous player in franchise history, Dominique Wilkins, to the Los Angeles Clippers for Danny Manning. Now, weird on a lot of levels. When the Hawks were really good, they were in first place in the East. And Wilkins was certainly older, but he was in his early 30s. But he was still effective. He was still arguably their best player. They were more of a balanced team at this point. So he wasn't the out and out star that he had been, but he was still obviously a key piece on the best team. This is the only time that an eventual number 1 seed traded their leading scorer during the regular season. I think there was some thought that Wilkins was going to leave them anyway, and that they had a chance at signing Danny Manning. That did not work out for the Hawks, so they would pivot later and have some pretty good late '90s teams with Mookie Blaylock and Dikembe Mutombo, of course, being the big free agency thing. So in the end, the Hawks did okay, but yes, but still, for a lot of Hawks fans, I know this was like the thing that killed a lot of the interest of the Hawks in the town, and I don't think the Hawks have ever really been seen the same way in Atlanta after this point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge deal. Trading, your franchise icon, arguably the best player in the recent history of the Atlanta Hawks. Obviously, the franchise goes back, many years. Exactly. But the Atlanta fans, I mean, Dominique is it. You know what I mean? He's that dude. So for them to trade him while they were good, it was pretty interesting reading some newspaper articles as well. And it's kind of half and half. It is like you said, a lot of people being like, well, look, he's going to leave. He's getting older. The Hawks are rebuilding or whatever. But it's also but they're really good. Why don't they just keep going and run it there? And obviously they didn't lose anything really with Danny Manning coming in there. But like you said, it was all done for, okay, well, we'll trade, our franchise player, our franchise, top player in the franchise, quote unquote, recent franchise history or whatever, for Danny Manning. But then we'll be able to sign Danny Manning. So it's going to be fine. And then he ends up saying, no, I'm going to go to Phoenix. And then they're kind of left with, nothing. But as you said, Dominique, what we would know would be on the kind of the last legs of his career as well. So it ended up not being a bad trade, but still just kind of a shocking trade that you trade Dominique Wilkins while you're good. It's not like, the Hawks had gotten bad and just said, all right, Dominique, this is fun, but, you got to go. But Dominique was good and they were good. And they still said, yeah, bye, which is hard to believe. The PR battle of that is one that, like you said, Atlanta, I don't think has ever won, trading Dominique Wilkins while they were good. So
yeah, absolutely. The Lakers missed the playoffs for the first time since 1976, 18 years. Yeah, right. Yeah. Only a couple of streaks that would have, compared to that, obviously the one that the Spurs are on, the Celtics, I think, had a 20-year one. The National Sixers franchise, I think, had, quite a long one too, but there probably are only a handful that, would reach the, 18 plus mark in NBA history. Maybe we'll have to dig into that one in the future. But yeah, the other odd thing about the Lakers this season is Magic Johnson ended up being their coach at the end of the season. Had a 16-game stint, and things started off really well, won 5 of the first 6 games. Things, look like they're great. And then they lose the last 10 games. And Magic is like, yeah, I'm out of here.
Yeah, this kind of sucks.
Yes, right.
I don't like this.
Yeah.
This is a lot of pressure and not that much fun. I'm going to go buy movie theaters and do a talk show or something. I think. I forget when the talk show came.
That was a little bit later, yeah. He bought some ownership in the team as well, I think, right around this time as well. So
yeah, that's much more fun, just to make money without doing anything as opposed to coaching, which is not fun at all.
Which is heartbreaking, yeah. So, the Houston Rockets started the season with 15 straight wins, which tied a record set by the 1948 Washington Capitals of the BAA. And in fact, Seattle and Houston became the first pair of teams to start the season 10-0.
Yeah, a really fun one here. And then we get to the season's final day. We'll jump back into the playoffs here a little bit because the playoffs and the finals have a lot of fun, interesting, weird stuff going on as well. But to add to the weirdness, on the season's final day, David Robinson, he wants to get that scoring title. So, oh boy, he puts up 71 points. He gets the scoring title. Reminds us, of course, of the great David Thompson, Georgia Gervin battle in 1978, where the both men knew how many points they needed to win the scoring title, and they were kind of battling with one another, across lines to try to win that scoring title. But yeah, never forget David Robinson just getting fed the ball to score 71 points and get the scoring title, and eventual MVP as well. Yeah.
Yeah, there was. I was watching a game over the last few days where Mark Jackson was doing the commentary, and they brought that up. And Mark Jackson still not over that apparently of the Spurs fouling the Clippers to get the ball back and get Robinson more chances to score the points.
It does kind of suck, but I also kind of like it. It's one of those weird. It's like the Devin Booker, in a game where they lose by 20, trying to do whatever he can to score 50 or whatever. They lost even by more than that. I forget. I don't know. Part of me thinks that sucks. But then part of me is also I love that David Robinson scored 71 points on the final game to get to the scoring title. I don't know. The problem is I don't ever want to agree with Mark Jackson. So I think I'm going to say that it's cool and I like it. So.
All right, fair enough. Is
that okay? I just don't want to agree with Mark Jackson on pretty much anything. So
that works. That sounds reasonable. The Denver Nuggets become the first 8th seed in history to beat a number 1 seed, famously defeating the Supersonics 3-2. Of course, you all see the iconic moment of Mutombo, holding on the ball underneath the basket after, the Nuggets clinch the upset. Also, if I recall correctly, the Sonics were up 2-0 and the Nuggets rallied 3-0. Is that correct? Is my memory correct on that?
I think so. Yeah. It's really weird. And I think we talked about it many moons ago in our second best team in the 90s discussion, where we talked about how deflating this loss was for the Sonics too, because it was arguably their best regular season to that point. Everything seemed like it was ready to go. Kemp had gotten great. Gary Payton had gotten great. The team was just really, really good. And they get up early on the Nuggets. They're ready to go. And then just for no reason whatsoever, they just blow the series to the Nuggets for no earthly idea why that happened. And yeah, it's pretty crazy. And the Sonics obviously, have other highs throughout the 90s, but we always, I think during that episode we theorized too that this was their best chance to win a championship or at least make it to the NBA finals. And it just completely got derailed by the Robert Pack to Kevin Mutombo Denver Nuggets, which is very, very strange in history as well. So
hey, LaFonso Ellis.
Our good friend LaFonso Ellis. So.
Our very, very good friend. One of our best friends, actually, LaFonso Ellis. So and then, to cap it off, during Game 5 of the NBA Finals between the Knicks and the Rockets, the O.J. Simpson highway chase interrupts the television broadcast, simulcast between the two events. So the NBA, unfortunately, gets a bit overshadowed by events happening in the world.
Yeah, again, just the perfect way to cap off this super weird season is that, as the game's going on, there's a split screen because O.J. Simpson is driving on a highway in a white Bronco. It's perfect. It's a perfect way to cap off an incredibly weird season. Our next weird season, 1995-1996. As far as weird seasons go, this one's pretty low on the list, I'd say, but still, yeah, it's still pretty weird. The 1995, there was actually a lockout, an off-season lockout, the first lockout of 4 in the history of the NBA as well. So the first time it had ever happened. Previous collective bargaining agreement expired after the 93-94 season, as we said. A no strike, no lockout agreement made in October 1994. This is a bunch of legal jargon that nobody really cares about. But anyway, they had a moratorium on doing any sort of labor discussions. That expired on June 15th, 1995, one day after the NBA Finals occurred. And we'll get to that in kind of how it ended, but some things that happened as well. The expansion draft, which was to be held on June 24th, they're bringing in the Vancouver Grizzlies and the Toronto Raptors. We'll talk about that in a sec. That gets delayed. The NBA draft, or does not get delayed. They actually had that as well. The NBA draft, that doesn't get delayed as well. So the NBA draft and the expansion draft can happen, but every other part of league business cannot happen. No trades, no free agent signings, no contract extensions, no summer leagues, nothing from July 1st to September 12th. So actually a pretty long amount of time as well. 17 players, including Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Patrick Ewing, Reggie Miller, and Alonzo Mourning. They tried to decertify the players union, so that causes some ripple effects as well. Thankfully, no games are lost due to this lockout. New collective bargaining agreement reached before the season started, officially lifted on September 18th, 1995. And the main lasting effect that we can kind of come from that lockout is rookie scale contracts in effect for the first time. And weirdly, kind of as an aside here, there was also a lockout of NBA referees that lasted until December 12th, 1995. Replacement referees were used until then, which I never, ever knew until I did this research for this episode, that there was an NBA referee lockout and they used replacement refs until the early part of the 95 season, which is pretty interesting. So,
all right. Yeah. But a couple of these actually involve ref labor issues of all things.
Get paid. So, I'm down. Hey, yeah, but it's Salvatore, get paid.
Yeah, hey, exactly. Not with airline tickets, but with actual salary,
exactly. Well, I mean, not in that time period. Nowadays, I don't know. Airline tickets are
right. Well, that the airline scandal happens in a couple seasons, so in 98. So
right.
The text. So it certainly was going on at this point, I would imagine.
We got to do an episode about that. That's some hot airline ticket scandals.
You love that.
All right. So also you have during these seasons, you mentioned it a little bit earlier, that you have the shortened 3-point line, which caused a lot of issues. They shortened the 3-point line 22 feet from the usual 23.9 feet. So it comes in about about 2 inches or so, give or take. And this is during the 94-95, 95-96, and 96-97 seasons. Team 3-point averages don't really, they don't jump a ton in the first season, 93-94. 9.9, so not a huge change. By 94-95, though, we do start seeing the change. 15.3 is the first season where we really see that 3-point attempts skyrocket. And then 95-96, again, we were adding this to a pretty weird year. Again, they kind of skyrocket again to 16. They would go even more in 96-97 to 16.8. Before then, the league brings the NBA 3-point back in 97-98, and then it immediately drops, as you kind of would assume, to 12.7. So even though the teams didn't really do it, I wouldn't say the teams kind of exploded at 3 points. So that's a pretty, doubling, your 3-point attempts is still, I'd say a pretty big deal. But, what we saw more than I think the teams sort of harnessing the power was individuals harnessing that power. George McLeod comes to note first. He shoots 678 threes in 95-96. That destroys John Stark's record from the previous year, which was 611. And then 3 players in total that year, the year we're talking about here, all top Starks' previous record from the year. George McLeod, as we mentioned. Dennis Scott gets 628 3-pointers. And Mookie Blaylock, 623, 3-point attempts as well. And all in all, in 95-96, 8 players enter the top 20 overall 3-point attempts leaderboard by the end of the year. George McLeod, Dennis Scott, Mookie Blaylock, Mitch Richmond, our very good friend Cliff Robinson, even more than LaFonso Ellis. Cliff Robinson loves us. Chuck Person, Vernon Maxwell, and Allen Houston. So all those guys enter the top 20. But, kind of circling back to a prior, discussion that we had, 94-95, that's when we see just like a complete ridiculous amount of players enter the top 20 for 3-point attempts. John Starks gets in there. Mookie Blaylock gets in there. Dan Marley gets in there. Nick Van Exel, Reggie Miller, Glenn Rice, Chuck Person, Tim Hardaway, Vernon Maxwell, Nick Anderson, Dana Barros, Mitch Richmond. It's nuts. So before the 94-95 season, only 48 players had ever attempted more than 300 threes in a season. After 94-95, that number explodes to 77 and almost doubles. And then after 95-96, it jumps again to 113. So just in a few years, we went from 48 players all all time shooting more than 300 threes in a year to 113. It just becomes commonplace after a little while. And that adds weirdness. Like the whole game changes. There's more, the floor is more spaced. There's a little bit of a faster play. The scores, kind of rise a little bit. Individual players do well. Like it can't be understated how big of a deal this was and how it was sort of a peek into what would become, the 3-point revolution in, sort of today's NBA or over the last few years. But we saw it a little bit here. Went away for a while. ISO ball became the kind of the preferred style, and then it came back in a big way, mid 2000s, late 2000s, and then now to today's NBA that we see as well, where now all these records are just completely moot because Steph Curry puts up the same amount of 3 points that the entire league did in prior years. So a little moot now, but at this time it was pretty wild and pretty revolutionary.
Yeah, exactly. It was sort of a taste of what would come. It was just sort of a sampling of the style that the NBA would evolve into, but it definitely took a while. But yeah, obviously, as you mentioned, there was quite a decent jump in 3-point attempts, and as you mentioned, just really certain individuals really took advantage of that and kind of changed reputations based on that. Some other key things that happened during that time, as you talked about, there are 2 new expansion teams, both the first non-U.S. teams to join the league, the Toronto Raptors and the Vancouver Grizzlies. There was a huge fight early on in the season, November of 95. There were 8 players suspended, 8 others fined in a brawl between the Sacramento Kings and the Indiana Pacers. It was started by a fight between Dale Davis and Michael Smith. It was the largest number of players suspended for one single incident at the time. So, quite a bit. Not really. I don't think talked about quite as much as a lot of the other fights during that time. I guess maybe the Kings being involved in it was made it less exciting.
Yeah, you don't hear about that one very often, but yeah, it's that's a pretty big deal. 8 players suspended and 8 fined. Like that's everybody. Right. That's like most people like on both teams, getting reprimanded. So that's a pretty big deal.
If you were punished, your team was mad at you if you didn't get punished during that situation. So.
I guess who are the 4 guys that are like, oh, sorry,
whoops.
I was getting water. I didn't know we were in a fight.
Yes. Not the most unusual trade ever, but the Alonzo Mourning, Glenn Rice trade occurs at the beginning of the season. It's pretty rare to have a big trade at the beginning of the season, but it's even more rare, I think, for comparable players. I mean, Mourning clearly the better player, but Glenn Rice also a star, all-star, probably all NBA a couple time player. I mean, a pretty good return. It's unusual for 2 players of that level of significance to be traded for each other, right at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we kind of call them on this show, the challenge trade, where it's like 2 good players just get traded for each other. Like, let's see if it's better if you're on our team and this guy's on that team. And also Alonzo Mourning too. I think the ramifications of that is the first kind of dent in the Charlotte Hornets thing, because with Mourning and Johnson and Bogues, they become one of the more popular teams in the NBA, and the aesthetics are perfect for the 90s. It's a really fun team, and this is the first time where they make a move to break up that core, and bringing in Glenn Rice is no slouch, and obviously they still had success after that, but it does feel like the first of the you guys are kind of losing what made them special in the early 90s, and sort of losing that core, even if it maybe was better for the basketball, it was worse for kind of the branding or the popularity of the team, globally, or at least in this country for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. And the home fans who had been so supportive, that was kind of one of the starts of it declining
to the point where 7 years later they just can't even be in that city anymore. We have to move because nobody likes us at all anymore. We must go.
Yeah, and George Stinn had a lot to do with that.
Did not help. Did not help whatsoever. But
right. Magic Johnson returning to the court after a 4-year absence for the Lakers. Played basically the second half of the season and played well despite having gained a decent amount of weight during that time, and playing pretty much power forward exclusively, but yeah, still an effective player. 4 years later, had a nice little coda to his career, so to speak, for a pretty good team. They were they were a 50-plus win team that year. This was the year before Shaq, but and they changed that team over quite a bit to get Shaq the next year. But that was definitely a little fun endeavor for Magic to come back to the league, especially after what we talked about had happened with the HIV diagnosis and his first comeback kind of being aborted because of the the other players' reaction to the idea of him coming back. Bullets announced they would change their team name to the Wizards during the season. The change would occur into the next season. Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf was suspended for refusing to stand during the national anthem in March of 1996. Of course, having a lot of discussion of the national anthem during the NBA in the bubble. In April 1996, a couple of incidents involving players and referees. Nick Van Exel was suspended for 7 games after shoving referee Ronnie Garrettson into the scorer's table. And then just a few games later, Magic Johnson, what appeared to more be an accidental bump of a ref, he was suspended for 3 games for that. Of course, that being very contrary to Magic Johnson's reputation. There was also an incident earlier on in the season involving Dennis Rodman and referee, which is kind of more in line with what you would expect.
Yeah, for sure. But other 2 more things for this kind of weird, well, not necessarily a weird season, but an interesting season, I should say. On the weird scale, maybe it's a little low, but it's a very, very interesting season. And there's some weird stuff in there too. April 1996 is WNBA is announced, which again was a huge undertaking by the NBA, a huge just announcement, a kind of ahead of the game in a lot of ways for the NBA and for that league. Saying, okay, what we're going to do, we're going to have an all women's basketball league. We're going to support it financially and all that. And for a lot of people that didn't grow up during this time, like this was a huge deal. I remember this being just talked about on everywhere, and it's the NBA is at the peak of their powers. They can pretty much do no wrong, and they decide, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to shine a light on women's basketball players. We're going to create a women's pro league, and that's awesome. Like there had been women's pro leagues throughout the history of for 50, 60 years before that, but none of them, all of them were kind of fly by night operations. Not really ever felt like they were serious. This is the NBA now saying, no, we're serious about this, and we're going to make sure that it's a success, and we're going to do everything we can to support it. And the NBA did. I mean, like I remember, we got next. Like that was like the famous line, and the marketing buzz on it was pretty crazy. And whether it was a tremendous success or whether you consider the NBA's support of the WNBA to be a positive, long term, I guess that's the discussion for a different day. But at this time, it was a huge deal, and I remember them being lauded for it, for stepping up and saying, hey, we're going to do this thing. So. Yeah,
absolutely. And obviously the league's still going strong, more than 20 years later. So, obviously had a very lasting impact. And then, of course, Chicago Bulls setting the NBA regular season record with 72 wins after, Jordan had come back, late in the previous season, but this was his first full season back. And obviously tremendous success both for him and for a team with him, winning MVP as well.
All right. You ready for, I think it was the most popular season that people said to us when we said, hey, what season do you think was weird? And they're right. The 1998-1999 season, which of course featured the famous 1999 NBA lockout, the third lockout in NBA history, lasted from July 1st, 1998 to January 20th, 1999, forced the 98-99 regular season to be shortened to only 50 games per team. That season's All-Star game also was canceled, which is pretty huge as well. Anytime you cancel the All-Star game, like in baseball, anytime you cancel the World Series of the All-Star game or you cancel the NBA All-Star game, it always is like oh wow, this is like a pretty big deal and pretty serious. We don't need to get into too much of, if you want to learn a little bit more, read up on that lockout. There's many ways you can do it. The key issues, though, changing the league salary cap system and putting a ceiling on individual player salaries. People kind of look at the Kevin Garnett contract as one of them, but he was one of many. There was also like a Juwan Howard deal that everybody got really upset about as well. There was quite a few. It wasn't just Kevin Garnett. It was quite a few things were happening. But, essentially, the NBA owners want a hard salary cap. The players say, we're not going to do that. We don't care. We'll miss the entire season. The owners eventually do back off of that. NBA Player Association Director Billy Hunter, they reached an agreement with NBA Commissioner David Stern eventually on January 6th to end the work stoppage and end the lockout on after 204 days. Biggest impacts on the labor deal, we'd say, kind of the biggest ramifications, max salary cap scale, depending on years of experience. Also a stricter salary cap, which leads to a lot of very crazy, wild cap cutting trades later on as well. And really the biggest result of all this was, in the months after the lockout, similar to the 94 baseball strike, like people said, fuck this. I don't really want to watch this. I don't want to watch the owners. I don't want to watch the players. Everybody was just kind of pissed at everybody. Television ratings, ticket sales declined in the 50 game season, and really both would remain way below pre-lockout levels in a lot of subsequent seasons. It really took a lot of years of rebuilding, whether that was Jordan leaving again, which we'll talk about in a sec, whether it was a multitude of other reasons. The lockout obviously did not help things whatsoever, because anytime, especially in the 90s, when you presented sort of a lockout, or the greedy players or the greedy owners, whichever it was, whatever side you were on, it just caused a lot of tension, and fans just really turned away in droves. And it took them many, many years to come back. So a very big deal here for NBA history.
Absolutely. Some of the key things were, January of '99, Michael Jordan once again announcing his retirement. I mean, I'm not really a surprise at that point, but making it official, as you said, between the lockout and losing Jordan, definitely took a big hit to the NBA's popularity. I just thought it was interesting that all these things happened on the same day, January 22nd, 1999. Charles Spear was officially reinstated by the NBA. Of course, his choking of his coach had happened, during the previous season. He'd been suspended. He'd already been traded to the Knicks in the previous week. So, and of course, the Knicks are going to end up being in the NBA Finals. So I never really thought how weird it was for Sprewell to go from being on the worst team in the league and being suspended for what he did, and then being on one of the NBA finalists, just in 1 year. That certainly interesting stuff. Also, Scottie Pippen signed and trade to the Rockets. That, of course, being a big deal after Pippen had spent his years being underpaid on the Bulls. And sort of a weird one, Denver signed Antonio McDyess to a long-term contract 1 season after McDyess had been traded by the Nuggets to the Suns for 3 first-rounder and 2 first-rounders. So the Suns basically got McDyess for 1 season for those 5 draft picks. Then he ends up going back to the Nuggets. Unfortunately for the Nuggets, McDyess, gets hurt and isn't really super effective for them. But certainly, what could have been a potentially huge fleecing on their part.
Yeah, there's a recent SB Nation YouTube video all about the Antonio McDyess, foray in Phoenix, which is pretty fun as well. So if you get a chance to watch that, and I think we've talked about it in prior episodes as well, but it's a very wild thing. Yeah, getting traded by the Nuggets, signing back with the Nuggets, feeling like it's the biggest coup in the world, but obviously because of injuries and just Denver being bad, it doesn't end up being a big deal. But yeah, it could have been like just an unbelievable thing, and just another kind of point and laugh at the Suns in this period thing as well. So because they had a lot of odd things happen to them during this time period, and this was just one of them. But you mentioned Latrell Sprewell there a little bit. The New York Knicks become just the second number 8 seed to defeat a number 1 seed ever. We talked about the other one, which, by the way, put a pin in like 8 seed beating number 1 seed, because in seemingly a constant in every one of these weird seasons we talk about is this happening. An 8 seed defeating a 1 seed. Not every single time, but almost every time. So pretty good stuff here. And New York Knicks would make it even more historic by becoming the only number 8 seed to make it eventually to the NBA Finals as well. So obviously a weird year. Not a true number 8 seed in the sense, but hey, you know what? It's a number 8 seed. They beat a number 1 seed. They made it to the Finals. We're going to count it anyway. So it's wild stuff like that's probably going to happen this year as well. But, with that being said, with 50 games, it made it weird. But still, they were there, and they still remain the only number 8 seed to ever make it to the finals. So, and probably the only one ever. I can't imagine, unless like in some wild scenario where like, a really good team misses a good player for half the year and then he comes back right before the playoffs. Like, I just, given the attrition rate that the playoffs has these days and the amount of games, like I just cannot fathom it ever happening again. But hey, we're in 2020. It's a very weird year. Who the hell knows what's going to happen?
Who the hell knows? Yeah. Also, the Spurs become the first ABA team to win an NBA championship through this accomplishment as well. Some other things that happened during the season: the Clippers lost 17 straight games to start the season, which is a record they held until the 2009 New Jersey Nets lost 18 straight. Karl Malone becomes the oldest regular season MVP, but loses on his a chance to actually win a championship with Jordan gone, as the Jazz were, I believe they were ousted by the Blazers, actually, who, of course, would lose to the Spurs before the Spurs go to the finals. Definitely, we talked about, obviously, the impact on the league, but, a lot of issues with the quality of play during the season, certain players not being in shape. It's kind of the historical reputation, although our friend NBA historian Todd Spear disagrees with that a little bit, says, hey, there's some really notable things that happened during the season and some worthy things. But you definitely, you can look at the numbers and see, what the effect was on the style of play.
Yeah, and so I did a piece for Fansided.com during the pandemic. I forget exactly when it happened, but just talking about how what we saw and how ugly the basketball was during this time, and like I agree that there were some things that were good, and I make it known in the piece as well, and like everybody kind of laughs at it and goes, oh my god, and laughs at Sean Kemp and laughs at these other guys that were not prepared for the league to come back, but they were literally given like 2 or 3 weeks to like get ready. They were given like 2 weeks for training camp, and then it's basically like, all right, let's go, and like that you can't do that, like, you know what I mean? Like it wasn't, and it was very obvious that wasn't going to work for the NBA. So yeah, we see a lot of numbers that just stand out here. The slowest pace in league history. The only time the league pace dipped below 90 was 88.9. I mean, come on, that's unbelievable. It's terrible. Like, it's just not good. Only season in the 3-point era to dip below effective field goal percentage of 47. It was 46.6%, which is again just absolutely deplorable. The worst free throw shooting year since 1967, and one of the 20 worst years of percentage wise in NBA history. The sixth worst average offensive efficiency, 102.2, with only 1975, 74, 76, 77, and 78 being worse. Also 10th in fewest assists per games ever, 20.7, and only one of 2 seasons in the 3-point era, also 2006 is the other one in here, to be in the bottom 10 in terms of assists. And when I say bottom 10 in assists, keep in mind that every other season in the bottom 10 took place in the 40s or the 50s. So that's what we're talking about here. That's the comp. And again, I don't blame the players. I don't really blame, coaches. I don't blame any. It just kind of happened where like nobody was ready. Nobody knew the plays. Nobody really knew what was going on. Nobody was in shape. It just, nobody was ready for the season to happen. And then it happened. And then everybody had to get out there and do it. And there was tons of injuries and like wear and tear injuries and knees blown out. And so it's just a complete disaster. And it, absolutely not how you handle a season like this, but added to the weirdness, I guess. So that's good. Good weird year here. So that's
I think, and next one we'll talk about is 2011 lockout. And this was handled a lot better, and I think was a lot less damaging to the NBA's reputation. It was the 4th lockout in league history. It did lead to, it did lead to games to be canceled. It went from 82 to 66 games. But for a lot of people, it was part of the season that the NBA, that most like mainstream fans don't really miss. I mean, the season started on Christmas. The schedule was compressed, which obviously not great for the players who had to play a tough schedule, but for fans, actually, you were getting more games in kind of a compressed period of time. So there was some excitement that was leading to that. So this one I think was handled in a much better way overall, and was definitely not nearly as negative as the 99 lockout was.
No, definitely not as damaging at all. And some other stuff that happened here. 161 day lockout began on July 1st, so very similar to the 1999 lockout. Ended December 8th. 2011. So, another really long lockout here. Delayed the start of the regular season from November to December, as you said. Kick things off on Christmas Day, which actually I remember loving. Like, I thought it was fantastic. Like, honestly, if every year was 6 games, maybe not with like the amount of games that they played in the short amount of time, even though I didn't really mind it. Like, it was pretty much like every day there was a good NBA game on. It helped that my team, Chicago Bulls were pretty good at that time too, but like every day there was a Bulls game on. The season started on Christmas, which was awesome. It was just like a perfect time to like kick the season off. I don't know. I liked it a lot, but anyway, I reduced the season from 82 to 66 games. And during the lockout, teams could not trade, sign, or contact players whatsoever. Also, players could not access NBA team facilities, trainers, or staff. So kind of similar to what we're doing. We dealt with in 2020 as well. November 14th, the players dissolved the union, allowing them to file antitrust lawsuits against the league. On November 26th, both sides reach a tentative agreement to end the lockout. Finally, new CBA calls for revenue split of 49 to 51.2% in terms of basketball revenues on flexible salary cap structure with harsher luxury tax. Again, you can go read on that if you really want, all that sort of stuff. But one of the fun and weird things about this season as well is during the lockout, some players signed contracts to play in other countries, most notably Europe and Asia. Turkey, I know, had a lot. China had a lot, where people were like, hey, look, I'm going to get paid to play basketball. I'm going to go to Turkey. I'm going to go to China. Some of them were smart and signed opt-out clauses or clauses that would allow them to return to America once the NBA was back, and others did not and were trapped in Turkey or China for the entire season, which led to some pretty fun stories as well of guys that were just like, oh, well, I guess I'm playing in Turkey this year because I forgot to sign an opt-out. But I think probably Darren Williams would probably be the most famous, I'd say. Like, would you agree in terms of guys that took overseas contracts? And I think he was able to come back though, right?
Yeah, he came back. Yeah, I think J.R. Smith ended up playing the whole season.
Yeah, which I mean makes sense. If there was one player that would forget to add let me go back to America, opt out. It's obviously J.R. Smith. Yeah, he was in China, right?
I think he was in China for the whole season. I think he came back, because the Chinese season ended in March, and he was able to play late in the season. That's just from memory. I forget exactly what happened.
Yeah, but that's perfect. I mean, that's perfect. J.R. Smith, but there was quite a few. I mean, there was a lot of guys that were able to come back, but there was quite a few who. Of course, we're not able to come back, but not bad. The season began, as we said, super cool way. 5 Christmas Day games, so they just launched it out. They just said, boom, here we are. Here's the NBA, which I loved. Do you remember loving that season as well?
Yeah, it was a fun season. I mean, it was definitely different. Definitely the pacing was different and interesting. But yeah, I definitely enjoyed, there was a lot of exciting things that happened in a smaller period of time. A lot of controversy, obviously, the big one being the fact that the Hornets agreed to trade Chris Paul to the Lakers. And then NBA Commissioner David Stern who was basically acting as the owner of the team because the league had acquired the Hornets from our good friend George Shinn, Charlotte's favorite George Shinn, basically nullified the deal and upset Lakers fans forever, and then led to Chris Paul going to the Clippers, changing the fortunes of all the franchises involved for quite a while.
Yeah, a huge deal. And yeah, the weirdness right there is just like, them agreeing to a trade and then David Stern saying, nah, actually, we're not going to do that. So the trade not happening. And then, of course, making it even more weird is that, no, Chris Paul is going to get traded to Los Angeles, but it's the Clippers, which was at that time. I mean, the Clippers were mildly respectable at that time, but it was the Clippers. They were not today's Clippers. They were still kind of a laughingstock as well. It's the final season for the Nets in New Jersey. They spent a total of 36 seasons in New Jersey in 4 different locations as well, which is just a fantastic New Jersey Nets story, is that they just bounce around between so many different arenas. And, you got Rutgers, you got the freaking Armory, the Izod Center, the Continental Airlines Arena, I think is the Izod Center, the Prudential Center in Newark, just never found a good home. And luckily after this, they were able to go to Brooklyn, and they have found a home in Brooklyn, thankfully. But yeah, the New Jersey Nets, just they belonged to New Jersey for sure, because they were everywhere in that state. So.
Yes. Yeah, they're New York years. They were a lot of different places as well. But yes, New Jersey, certainly they bounced around quite a bit. Some other notable things that happened. The Hawks and Jazz were in the first quadruple overtime in the league since 1997. The Bobcats set a single-season NBA record for the worst winning percentage, going 7-59 for a .106 winning percentage. The 73-76ers had previously held the record with just 0.4 of a more percentage point at .110. But of course, they played the full 82-game schedule. And speaking of the 76ers, they became just the 5th number 8 seed. Notice a trend here that we've talked about, to defeat a number 1 seed in the playoffs. When they beat the Chicago Bulls, it was this the first time that? No, this was not the first time. This was the second time that it had occurred with a best of 7 series, I believe.
Yes, yeah, that is true. But again, like I said, tying it together, a number 8 seed defeating a number 1 seed. If it's going to be a weird season, that's probably going to happen at some point for some. So expect whatever the number 8 and number 1 is, circle it for this year, because it feels like it's probably going to happen. So congratulations, Phoenix Suns, on defeating the Los Angeles Lakers. All
right, yes.
That'd be awesome.
Right.
The NBA might nullify that. They might say, actually, it's a best of 12. No, we're not going to have Devin Booker go to the second round instead of LeBron James. We're not going to have it happen.
No. The Bulls also, of course, a major reason that they lost is because Derrick Rose, suffered a torn ACL in Game 1 of the series, I believe. So, that obviously was a major factor in the Bulls losing here. Although the Sixers were a tough team, a tough, scrappy Doug Collins team.
Yeah, they made it all the way to the conference finals too. They kept going. I mean, nobody really liked watching them play, but they made it there. So good for them. Thad Young, Andre Iguodala, little Drew Holiday. Good little team.
And then to cap off the season, this lockout season, this unusual season, LeBron James wins his first NBA championship with the Miami Heat defeating the rising, Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden led Thunder to win the championship. And finally, he'd been waiting, his entire career at this point. I think it was his 9th season to win a championship, and was finally able to do that after the disappointing previous finals, the upset against the Dallas Mavericks. So, quite a notable accomplishment there, for, one of the best players in NBA history to win his first championship.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the Thunder making, a miraculous run to the NBA Finals as well was pretty cool, because they were still super young at that point, obviously still with Harden, still with Westbrook, still with Durant, which is another thing too, like similar to the prior year where the Dallas Mavericks kind of come out of nowhere. The Thunder, you knew the Thunder were going to be good. You knew they were going to be a great team, but I don't think anybody expected them to make it to the NBA Finals with 3 really good players under 23 years old or whatever they were at that time. They were just absolute babies. They make it all the way there, but of course they're completely outclassed by the Miami Heat, and LeBron James finally gets his first NBA Finals and finally gets the win and finally gets the trophy. So just capped off a very weird, very interesting season as well.
So Rich, we have other seasons that we want to discuss, some of the older seasons in NBA history. So since we've been going for a good amount of time, we're going to make that a part 2. So we're going to close this part of the episode here. So thanks everyone for checking us out. You can find us at the Stepback at fansided.com. And you can also find us wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Just search for Over and Back NBA. If you're into what we're doing, we would appreciate a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to us. And you can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Over and Back NBA. Feel free to leave a comment or correct the record or anything that we got wrong, or compliment us for the fine job that we did.
Yeah, do that. Do the last one. The last one's good. I like the last one.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so thanks for listening, and we'll back again soon.